What is up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So as you may or may not know by now, for season 7 we're seeing the return of trio and solo cash cups with some pretty reasonable prize pools. So I figured what better time to make a guide on how you can place higher in these tournaments and potentially grab yourself some cash. This video will be mainly focused around the solo cash cup starting on July 18th, but most of these tips should carry over to trio cash cups and other tournaments as well. With that said, definitely let me know if you'd like to see a version of this video for trios, as I'm happy to give it a shot if you guys want it. But with that said guys, if this video helps you out, then be sure to drop a like on it and consider subscribing as well if you want to see more content just like this in the future. And with that said, let's hop right into the video. Alright guys, so the first thing I want to mention is the entry to the tournament and the point system. One thing to note about these upcoming solo cash cups is that they do require you to be in Champions League, but luckily for you, I already put out a ton of arena tips and tricks content this season, so feel free to check those out if you're struggling to reach champs. But with that said guys, let's go ahead and dive into the point system for this tournament. So the first thing to note is that these cash cups are going to be extremely placement heavy. That means that you're most likely, at least if you're in a high lobby, going to run into some pretty stacked lobbies, and you're going to have to really focus on only taking fights when they're beneficial and unlikely to be third partied. To get into the specifics, the placements are pretty much spread out throughout the game, with the first placement point being given at top 75. Each kill gives you 1 point, while a win grants you 30 points, so with it taking 30 kills to equal 1 win, it's pretty much a no-brainer to play for endgame in these cash cups. Obviously there's no telling quite yet whether there's going to be like super stacked lobbies with storm surge and things of that nature, but considering how placement heavy the tournament is, I wouldn't be too shocked to see it, and I'm assuming some of the very high point lobbies might be pretty stacked. With that said, now that we've briefly gone over the point system, let's talk a bit about the specific playstyle and strategy you should employ to maximize your performance. The first thing I want to say here is that W key games are pretty much going to be non-existent in these solo cash cups of the placement based system. It's simply so much easier to play for endgame, try to survive as long as possible, and bank on points that way instead of going for maximum fights. My idea for these tournaments is to land at a reasonably passive spot, preferably an unnamed spot unless you don't mind fighting a good bit off spawn, and then simply farm and loot up as much as you possibly can. When it comes to the later zones, just try to set yourself up in a good spot ahead of time, try to play for early rotations, and just focus on an overall passive playstyle where your main focus is going into endgame with the best situation possible. Once again, endgame is going to be super critical here, so be sure to put yourself in the mindset of preparing for endgame for the whole match. Like, everything you do should be in preparation for endgame. When it comes to the breakdown of each specific game, I don't see it being necessary to have any W key or throwaway games, nor is it necessary to try and abuse elo or try to go for lower lobbies. Since the games are each going to be pretty long, just go for the maximum possible placement points, and don't worry too much if you can't get all 10 games in, as it's obviously much better to play it smart and make the most out of 8 games than playing 10 games and dying off spawn a few times, pretty much wasting time you could be otherwise using to play for placement. With that said guys, hopefully this video so far has given you a good idea of how you should play these solo cash cups if you're looking to maximize your points and potentially make money. For this next part of the video, I want to focus on some general tips that you can use for this tournament and other tournaments to maximize your performance. The first of these tips is going to be one that I say all the time to you guys, but it's especially important if you're playing a tournament, and that's figuring out a consistent drop spot and mastering it ahead of time. Whether you want to land a POI or an unnamed spot, contested or uncontested, you can pretty much make it work with any spot as long as you have a solid plan going into it. Make sure you know the ins and outs of your drop spot, figure out where exactly you want to land and how you're going to loot, figure out a strategy for if you ever need to disengage from your drop spot, develop a plan for farming materials, and really just emphasize mastering your early game. Since zones can be so RNG in mid and end game, you really just want to nail down what you can control, and one of those things you can control is your early game. Developing a strong plan for the start of the game is so critical when it comes to setting yourself up, so no matter where the zone pulls later into the game, you're already prepared. I don't really want to give an exact drop spot recommendation, as obviously if I give a tournament drop in this video, then that might spoil it, as it's going to be much more contested, but really just focus on finding a spot that meets your goals of playing placement and sets you up with everything you need for a good rest of the game. Obviously try not to slack off on loot if possible. You want to land a decent spot that has good enough loot for you to actually play out the game, but you also don't want to be too contested. You kind of have to find a nice middle ground. Moving on from that, my second tip is to stay consistent throughout the weeks of the tournament. Chances are if you hop straight into the first cash cup with 0 experience, you're almost guaranteed to not place at the top right away. The key here is to stay consistent, get used to the tournament environment, and build confidence in game against good players. The more you play these types of tournaments, the better you're going to do in them, and the more you're going to be able to learn and improve and just come back stronger each time. As well as that, one of my strongest recommendations is to VOD review each tournament session a day or two after. You can easily save the replays to your games, and it's critical that you watch through them after the tournament, especially the games you lost. That way you can figure out exactly what you did wrong and develop a plan to improve. Whether you made a poor rotation, got outplayed in a box fight, messed up your drop off spawn, or a number of other things, basically you just want to figure out what went wrong and then figure out how you can improve on that skill to fix the issue going into the next week. These tournaments run back to back every week, presumably probably for the entire season, so focus on taking each week as a learning experience. If you really want to make it in competitive, the slow and steady improvement approach is absolutely the best thing that you can do. And even if you don't make money in this set of cash cups, chances are there's going to be other tournaments next season and the season after that, and so on and so on. Improving in competitive is a really long process, but by staying consistent and VOD reviewing to learn from your mistakes, you should see some really solid progress even over just a few tournaments. Another tip I want to mention, just as a general tip for tournaments, is to not be afraid of taking breaks. If you find yourself getting super mad or tilted during a tournament, you're much better off taking a 10-minute break than queuing straight into another game, because as you know, getting mad is going to make you so much more shaky and irrational with your decisions. One tip that became really popular a few seasons back was the 3-game rule, which basically stated that you can play 3 games per hour, and if you finish 3 games without reaching the hour mark, then you take a break until the next hour comes along. So you would do that for 2 hours, and then on the final hour, you'd crank out the rest of your games. This was super useful during the more kill-oriented cash cups, as it really helped pros avoid getting too tilted, but since this is such a placement-oriented tournament, you probably don't want to do the same exact thing since the games are really long and you might not even get a break if you follow the 3-game rule. What I recommend you do instead is what I coined the 3-game break rule. This is a very similar concept that basically states that after every 3 games, you take a 5 to 10 minute break, going outside to get some air, maybe grabbing something to eat, or whatever else you might do on a break. Basically, this break is meant to allow you to clear your head, help you avoid getting built up anger over multiple games, and really just makes the tournament much easier to handle over the span of multiple hours. Of course, you can also modify this rule if you find yourself needing more or less breaks, but having some sort of plan as to when you're going to take breaks during a tournament is a really great way to avoid getting overly tilted and can make the tournament much more enjoyable overall. Finally, my last tip for solo cash cups is to consider finding a group of players to hop in a call with, preferably players who are in the same tournament you're in. Having a positive group of people to talk with when you're playing can really help you stay in check mentally and can give you some critical support if you're having some rough games or struggling in the tournament. Surrounding yourself with like-minded players who want to perform well can really help you stay positive and maintain your composure, which is absolutely critical for these types of cash cups, as one of the biggest killers in these tournaments is when you struggle for a few games and have that built up anger for the rest of the tournament. With all that said though, hopefully those tips help you all out when it comes to improving in cash cups and other tournaments and staying mentally stable and positive throughout the duration of the tournament as well. Maintaining your composure in these tournaments is going to be the key to performing well, and hopefully the tips that I've given should make it much easier for you to do that, as well as helping you improve in these tournaments over time. But anyway guys, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to place higher in solo cash cups during season 7. If this video helped you out, be sure to drop a like on it and consider subscribing as well. As well as that, if you want to go an extra step to help your boy out, then it would really mean a lot if you could use code TECHWIN in the item shop, as it's totally free and it really does help me out a ton. With that said, best of luck in these cash cups if you decide to play them. Thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.